Добрый вечер, уважаемые участники мастер-класса. Меня зовут Елизавета. Я менеджер приемной комиссии в школе кино и телевидения индустрии. Сегодня мы продолжаем с вами нашу серию пятничных мастер-классов с зарубежными кинематографистами, профессорами топовых мировых киношкол. Школу кино и телевидения индустрия основали режиссер Федор Бондарчук и продюсеры кинокомпании «Водород» Михаил Врубель и Александр Андрющенко. Нашу школу, собственно, и отличает то, что у нас преподаватели практики в процессе учебы делятся своим опытом и своими знаниями с нашими студентами. А после обучения наших студентов ждет обширная программа стажировок. Как раз сейчас мы запускаем набор на очные программы, такие как менеджмент в музыкальном бизнесе, менеджмент актеров в кино, VFX, два направления: композинг-артист и 3D-артист, звукорежиссура, режиссура монтажа и маркетинг оригинального контента, то есть это кино и сериалы, а также программа для обучения профессии второго режиссера. Кроме того, в течение практически года мы готовились к тому, чтобы запустить онлайн-обучение, чтобы у нас могли учиться студенты не только из Москвы, но и со всего мира, да, чтобы люди, которые учатся у нас, могли развиваться в том числе в своих городах, в других странах и так далее, и получать большое количество практики и хороших проектов в будущем. В онлайне у нас сейчас также идет набор. Ближайшие программы стартуют уже 17 мая, и среди этих программ продюсирование, режиссура, сценарное мастерство, также режиссура монтажа, VFX и филммейкинг. Часть программ у нас будет стартовать в апреле, но вы уже можете оставлять заявки на обучение на этом лендинге, поэтому оставляйте. Наша приемная комиссия с удовольствием вас проконсультирует по всем направлениям, которые у нас есть. Возвращаясь к нашим мастер-классам, как вы уже знаете, мастер-классы у нас проходят по пятницам регулярно, поэтому вы также можете на них регистрироваться по тем темам, которые вам интересны. Возвращаюсь к теме сегодняшнего мероприятия. Надо сказать, что сегодня наш мастер-класс будет посвящен персонажам, которые вызывают у зрителя эмпатию. И наш спикер Стив Мазур расскажет о том, как вызвать у зрителя эмпатию к протагонистам и антагонистам. Стив Мазур – профессор Американского института киноискусства Университета Южной Калифорнии в Лос-Анджелесе. Это сценарист и автор программ, который работал вообще с ведущими кинокомпаниями и киностудиями, многими телеканалами. То есть это и Warner Brothers, Disney, Sony, Fox, Universal и DreamWorks. И сегодня Стив расскажет, как эмпатия влияет на все элементы сценария, в том числе на диалоги и решение сцен. По регламенту наш сегодняшний мастер-класс будет идти в течение часа и 30 минут, то есть час 15 – это сам мастер-класс, и затем 15 минут серия вопросов и ответов. Поэтому вы можете в нашей трансляции, в чате оставлять вопросы, и на самые интересные из них Стив ответит после своего выступления. И также, если у вас есть какие-либо вопросы по поступлению в нашу школу, вы можете оставлять их в этом чате, мы постараемся на них ответить. Кроме того, для всех, кто досмотрит наш сегодняшний вебинар до конца, у нас есть сюрприз, приятный подарок, поэтому обязательно смотрите, и мы озвучим его в конце мастер-класса. Поэтому давайте перейдем к нашему сегодняшнему мероприятию. Большое вам спасибо, и я передаю слово Стиву.
Well, thanks everyone for inviting me. It's a great privilege to talk to you folks today. I'm a writer. I'm a comedy writer. I've been a member of the Writers Guild for a little over 30 years now. So I was asked to try to give you some practical advice on screenwriting from my perspective, particularly in regards to character. And I want to say, we're sort of on the verge of coming out of this pandemic year. which is, of course, such a tragedy. But one way that I tried to cope with the pandemic was to watch movies again. And I watched more movies in the last year than I had in the previous 10 years. And it sort of renewed my love for movies and just what an amazing thing it is to be involved in this industry that is so important to our entire culture. And I think in many ways, you know, live theater has certain benefits that movies can't achieve. But on the flip side, I think movies are where all the art forms sort of come together and work together to achieve something that's truly great. It can be great. And, you know, the visual and the word and the music and touching people and moving people. And so I think it's a real privilege to be able to work in this area. So in any event, I'm feeling great about movies myself, and I think it's a very good time to be a student studying movies and folks who are aspiring to be screenwriters. I think it's a good time. So basically, I'm just going to give you some suggestions based on my experience. And I'm really taking you all the way very back to the basics that are fundamental in my way of thinking. My approach is pretty clear-cut in terms of features, which is I try to think and make decisions about the biggest issues first, and I let those decisions help me make decisions about less significant elements, right? And so basically it's giving myself principles to follow in writing my screenplays. And one thing to note is the order of what constitutes big and what constitutes a less significant element. So for me, I'm interested in putting money in my pocket, right? I mostly write comedies. And I think that as a result of that, usually the most important, biggest element is the concept or the big idea of the piece. It's the way it's going to be, it's the way it's going to attract an audience usually. So some examples of that are, say, Die Hard, which is about one guy who ends up taking on these violent mercenaries and is able to take down this attack just on his own. The Godfather is the big ideas about a mob family in New York in the 40s and the transition in power. So it's the big idea, it's the thing that's going to sell the piece. But I would say of equal importance, even though I list it second, of equal importance is the theme of the piece or what you're trying to say in the piece. This becomes very significant in regards to character. So what's the point that you're trying to make in your piece? What is it that you want to say to the audience, right? Why do we become writers? It's because we have something that we want to say. And so that is vitally important and becomes an important principle. Then for me, this is a bit unusual. The next is structure of the script of the movie to come. Structure is really just the order of events and how things unfold over the course of the 90 minutes or 2 hours. The best metaphor for structure for me is a roller coaster ride, where if you've ever taken a roller coaster, there's a very set structure for how it takes place. So at the very beginning, often you're on this, rail car and you're moving up this steep hill, and you're moving very slowly, very methodically. Why? because it's building this anticipation and this tension. And some engineer gave a lot of thought as to where the various scares of the ride take place. And in general, the biggest scare, the scariest part of the ride will take place right before the end, because at that point it will have the most impact. So structure is significant. And after that comes character. So note, that's fourth on my list. A lot of screenwriters would put it third in terms of movies, but even I have it at fourth. We're going to talk about that in 1 second. And then underneath that is tone. Tone is very important. It's sort of the level of reality of your script or your movie. Is it a very realistic world that matches the real world? Is it a hyper realistic world like a noir film? It's hyped up, gritty. Is it a broad comedy, a wild physical comedy, which isn't very real? And so that becomes an issue. And then I'm considering specific scenes, and finally dialogue. So note, often folks who aren't involved in making movies, they place dialogue very high on the list. That becomes the most important aspect to them. But to my way of thinking, unless the other elements are working, the greatest dialogue in the world won't work. And the reverse is true too. You can have terrible dialogue in a movie, but if the premise and the subject matter, the message of the piece and the characters are great, that movie will work even though the dialogue isn't particularly memorable. So this is how I think about it. Now, why do I put character fourth? Because I think in a lot of art forms, you would start with character. In television, for television series, often character comes first, and then the show will be built around a character. This is particularly true in the United States. There's a lot of TV series that are based around stand-up comedians. And so they'll start just with the comedian, and then they'll try to build a world to play off of that comedian's strengths and that point of view of the comedian. So they'll start with character there. It's true in novels. James Joyce's Ulysses, his lead character is Leopold Bloom, and the whole piece is built around this individual. And of course, in a novel, we're able to get into the inner life of individuals. And so the focus there is on character. But in movies, I would contend that in writing your screenplay, you would be better off coming up with a character that serves the premise, that serves the message or theme of your piece, rather than the reverse. In other words, you don't want to have this character that dictates or changes what your strongest premise would be. Or you don't want to have this character who doesn't enable you or empower you to say your message as strongly as you can. That's a bad trade-off. And instead, you can modify your character to meet the needs of your premise and your message, your big idea for your movie. So that's I'm just checking my notes here real quick. So let's take a moment and speak a little bit more about message. Why do we become writers? Because we want to communicate something to the world. What do we want to communicate to the world? What do we want to say to the world in our work? And I think some writers want to say something that's never been said before. But to me, that by definition is not a good idea. Because if something has never been said before, just think about it. How important can it be to the people in your audience if they've never heard it or thought about it or discussed it? And instead, we want to be talking about things that are of significance and importance to our audience, that can move them, that can touch them, right? And I would contend that the things that people care about are really a finite number, basically, that the mass audience is concerned about or worried about or care about. We can reduce, if on 2 sheets of paper, listing 100 items, we can account for 98% of what the world cares about. The top 10 probably would account for over 50%. What would it be? Love, relationships. It would be self-worth. It would be the individual versus the community, and what's our relationship in that way, right? Loyalty, revenge, war. These are topics that take up a great deal of our energy and our attention. And those are the subject matters that we want to be touching upon. So there's this term called universal truth. And it's often used, that term is used as a pejorative in a negative way because, oh, well, that's a cliche saying. Things like better to have loved and lost than never to have loved before, or to thine own self be true, or if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. These become cliches. But the reason they become cliches is because they touch upon very significant issues that we struggle with as people. And this is all people struggle with it. And I would contend that the same subject matters that Shakespeare was concerned about 400 years ago are the subject matters that we are concerned about today. Now, we might, of course, it's in a different context. The world is mighty different, right? It's extremely different. And also, we may have a different point of view on the balance of say, we can agree that self-worth is important and that we're all striving for self-worth. That's true during Shakespeare's time, it's true today, but maybe the answer of what gives one self-worth is going to be different, right? Maybe the notion of is it better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all? Well, today, given modern relationships or the context of today's world or post-pandemic, et cetera, maybe our answer to that issue is going to be different. So we might take a different point of view on this universal truth or this subject matter that's of great concern. We certainly are going to be striving to talk about it in the context of today, to speak to the audiences of today. So basically, on this point, I don't think our goal as writers is to say something that's never been said before. And instead, our goal is to talk about these very important, deep-seated human issues, but talk about them in a context of today and the point of view of today's world, today's people, the point of view of you, the author. So a great example of that might be Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. It's a Jim Carrey movie, and it's basically exploring this. Is it better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all? But it's doing it through sci-fi, science fiction. It's looking at it from a different angle. It's very interesting. So you can kind of take a new look at this very significant issue, and you might come out on the issue in a different way. And these are, by the way, these are the hardest questions, right? These questions that have been around for hundreds of years, generation after generation. Those are the hard questions. What gives one self-worth? Well, we can say, oh, of course, it's doing good for others, or caring about, trying to help your community or whatever. But we know the answers that we're supposed to give. But in living our lives, those are the hardest questions. Those are the most challenging questions, right? So those are the hardest questions. And those are the questions I suggest that we explore in our movies. And that goes for even comedies, right? Just because it's a comedy doesn't mean that you're not talking about something important about what it means to be human. In fact, comedy can often be the most effective way to talk about something that's heartfelt or deep-seated in this way. So one is find this message or theme that you want to explore that's of importance to most of people in your audience. It's important to people today, and then figure out, what do I want to say about this issue or topic? Now, the important thing about that is we don't impose our message on our premise. So if we have a premise, that doesn't mean that we should take that premise, that idea, like, oh, I want to just make this movie about a mob family in New York in the 1940s. And then I'm going to talk about anything that I want to talk about. Because if you do that, then the elements don't quite fit, right? And you'll be forcing your theme on the material when it doesn't fit. So instead, the better practice is to look at your premise and to ask yourself, what themes does this premise explore organically, naturally, that just come up naturally? So in the case of The Godfather, it's about this mob family. Well, what could that be about? Well, it could be about family, for sure. That's easy. What could it explore? It could explore violence in the world and how one reacts to it, or the necessity of violence. There's usually, with any big idea for a film, there's usually a few premises that might be explored naturally, but the message that the writer of The Godfather latched onto was the sins of the father being invested upon the sons. In other words, that your father's, your family's sins, it's very hard and difficult to escape them. And so that becomes the overarching theme of The Godfather. It's a thing that it's going to be explored. And the two fit naturally. There's no point in The Godfather where we're pursuing the plot of The Godfather, the story of The Godfather, and we have to stop things to talk about theme. We never do it. It's seamless because the theme is inherently discussed by the concept of the piece, the story. Another example, Pixar movies, that's an animation company in America. They are excellent storytellers. And if you're you're aspiring to be a screenwriter, that's a good place to go for inspiration, to see, how they do things. So they have a movie called Finding Nemo. It's basically the the big idea, the story is about this fish that gets lost in the seven seas anywhere in the world, and his father has to go out and find him. Well, what themes are natural in that? And the folks at Pixar latched on to the theme of engaging with life as opposed to approaching life with fear, right? The son is lost, the father has to go after him, but the father is incredibly fearful of the world. And he has to take great risks to go on this journey to find his son. And over the course of the movie, one, he comes to recognize, yes, there are dangers in the world, but there's also adventure in the world, right? And that if you want to live fully, you have to be willing to take some risks in order to engage with the world. And he also discovers that he's able, that he has the qualities that help him to face risk, but also to enjoy the adventures. And as a result of that, he's going to be a better dad to his son, because at the beginning of the movie, he's very fearful for the son. But by the end, he's recognized, I want my son to live fully. So I'm going to raise him in a way that he will see the world and life as an adventure. Well, again, that's an issue that we all deal with, because should we approach the world, should we approach relationships, should we challenge ourselves, should we take risks in our careers and in meeting new people and joining organizations or whatever, should we put ourselves out there at the risk of being hurt, right? Or rejected or damaged in some way, right? Or, what's a better way to live life? And it's something that we all struggle with. So it's a great topic for this movie. It's something everyone in the audience can relate to directly. And again, because it's so inherently tied into the story itself, the world that they've created, that they're exploring, that we never have to pause and stop to talk about theme. And here's where character comes in. We are selecting characters who are best equipped to tell our tale, to say this thing that we want to say in our theme. Again, the most effective way in movies, there's very few exceptions. The most effective way to communicate is through the journey of our lead character or characters. They go on a journey because we are identifying with them, relating with them. We go on the journey with them. We're experiencing the world as they're experiencing it, and we're facing the decisions and the conflicts and the issues that they're facing as they're facing them, right? And so as they're making decisions, we're usually subconsciously facing the same decision. And what would we do in that circumstance? So that's our most effective way. So once we figure out, okay, we know what our story is. It's going to be about this mob family in the 40s. We know what our theme is. It's about the sins of the parents invested on the children. What's the best character that empowers us to tell that story? What character is most torn by this theme that we're exploring, right? So in the case of The Godfather, the lead of the movie is Michael, the son. At the beginning of the movie, he has separated himself from the family. He's joined the military, and he's at a big family wedding, and he tells his fiancée, I'm not them. They're my family, but that's not who I am, right? So he has rejected, he has made a statement, I can forge my own path in the world. I'm not impacted by the world of my family. And over the course of the movie, more and more and more, he's drawn in to the family. he cannot stop it. He cannot fight it, so that by the end of the movie, he has become 100% his father. He has become and embraced the same world of crime that his father had. So in that case, we've picked this character and we've given him characteristics to make him the perfect vehicle to explore this theme, right? The big idea, the concept of the movie and the theme have dictated who the character is, who the lead character is. And through that, through his facing this issue, by the way, often your lead character isn't even aware of what issue they're facing, right? Like we all are in our lives. We don't know what our big issue is. We're just living our lives, right? But the movie itself is throwing up obstacles that require Michael to continually face this tension between forging his own path or having to follow in the footsteps of his father, right? So again, my advice is, one, once you have your big idea, and that's hard to come up with, but you go, hey, this is an exciting venue for a movie. This is an exciting world. I have a really interesting story to tell. Number two, ask yourself, what am I saying in this movie? What do I want to say that comes out organically and naturally of this world, of this story? Then three, what is the best character or characters to put on this journey that will help me explore this theme? They usually are the characters who are most torn by the issue that you are exploring in your movie. Again, they don't know that they're torn, but they are, right? It's internal. So let me give you a couple more examples of that. The Hurt Locker is a very interesting movie. It's about the Iraq War, United States involvement in the Iraq War. The theme of that movie is stated as superimposed on the screen at the very beginning of the movie. It says, war is a drug. And what that means is that, like any other drug, you might really enjoy it and feel empowered by virtue of taking this drug for the first time, but you better beware, because the drug is addicting. And there'll come a day that you may want to stop taking the drug, but you won't be able to. So this is the message of the filmmakers in The Hurt Locker. So what character do they choose to focus on? It is a bomb disposal expert who is able to stop bombs from exploding. It's, of course, extremely dangerous work, but there's this rush of adrenaline that this guy feels. What are the circumstances of his life? His final tour is about to end. He is going home soon, and he'll be able to return to his life. So on the surface, you would think, well, here's a guy who is going to be able to walk away from war in this terrible situation and stop risking his life and go back to his wife and go back to his life. And he's, and of course, intellectually, we would all say, well, that's fantastic. Of course, what else would you want? But what's happened is this guy has become addicted to war. And therefore, when he does come home, he finds himself extremely restless. He misses that rush and adrenaline. He can't verbalize it, as few of us could, right? But he's itching to go back. And finally, he signs up for another hitch. So here are the filmmakers. They're making a movie about a bomb disposal unit. It's very exciting, high tension. The premise is extremely commercial and interesting and compelling. They find a theme that premise explores naturally. War is a drug. And be careful when you try, when you get involved with war, because you may become addicted. Then they are selecting characters that best help tell that story. These are characters who are the most torn by this issue, whether they're aware of it or not. And they are characters who are at a pivot point in their lives. This story is going to force them to deal with this issue that they're torn about. Let's see if I can do one more really quick. Frankenstein, the classic 30s original, Boris Karloff, and directed by James Whale. It's exploring faith, religion versus science. And the Dr. Frankenstein, is torn by this because he is enthralled by science, and science is empowering and can make man perform acts thought only available to gods. And the point of view of the filmmakers in the early 30s in the United States was, that's a mistake, right? Man should not aspire to be God. In fact, man should let the realm of God, leave it to God, and should be concerned about only things of man. That's their point of view. But this is what this movie is exploring. So again, they choose a lead character who is most torn by this issue. They're at a pivot point. For the first time, a man is able to create life. And how does this guy deal with it? Does he make the choice to do it? And how does he feel about that choice as the movie progresses? All right, so so I guess to take a step back, your character isn't some sort of free-floating thing out there that is dictating what your premise of your movie is to be and what the theme and what it's talking about. And you're not taking dictation as a writer from your lead character, which might be the case in a great novel. And maybe that's a perfect thing to do. But in a movie, instead, you're not the servant of your character. Your character is a servant to you. And you're choosing a character who's going to be most torn about this issue you want to explore, and who is going to be forced to face this question by the story, by the conflict that arises as they're on this journey. The journey is going to challenge them and make them make choices and decisions about this underlying issue. And if there are characteristics that are inconsistent with that, you change those characteristics. In other words, you don't change your theme and your message to fit what your character wants to say or wants to do. And instead, it's the reverse. Your character is the embodiment of this journey, of this thing that you want to explore. And if you need to change your character to better explore it, that's the right decision. Again, this is all my opinion, but I feel that that's the best way to approach. A couple more quick things on message. One is, does your movie get better the more themes you explore? You know, if my movie is about class, would it also be helpful if it was also about war, and if it was also about self-worth, and if it was also about medicine in modern times, etc.? Does my movie get deeper the more themes I add on? And the answer is no, because a movie's power can come from the elements working together to focus, right? If you're talking about an issue that resonates with your audience in a strong way, that we are all concerned about deep down, right? That really affects us deep down. That's an important thing to talk about, right? You know, in a 2-hour movie, are we going to exhaust, if the movie was about class, would we exhaust the discussion in 2 hours? Well, of course not. You can spend decades and decades and decades talking about class or poverty or race, right? These are issues that are very deep and very important and very worth exploring. So let's not try to pile on so that we only skim the surface talking about any one of 5 themes, right? And instead, let's simplify the elements to zero in on this significant issue to explore, right? So your movie does not get better the more themes you explore, as a rule. The one exception is when themes are related to each other, right? And the term I use, I don't know if this is a term in Russia, but it's a Russian nesting doll. It's these dolls where they're made out of wood usually, and they're hollow, and you take off the top, and inside is another doll. And then you take the top off that doll, and inside that is another doll. And you end up with a series of 5 or 6 dolls who all fit within each other. So if a sub-theme fits within a greater theme naturally, then you can explore more than one thing at once. So in the case of Hurt Locker, that was a strong message movie about the United States war in Iraq. And the point of view of the filmmakers was, this was a mistake, you know. But that was a sub-theme of their greater theme, war as a drug, right? So in the same point, like a Russian nesting doll, the Iraq war was a mistake for the United States, fits within the war as a drug exploration. So we can talk about both at the same time. You know, it's a natural fit. Talking about the second one doesn't take away from the first. Because why? The Iraq war was a mistake for the United States is a message that certainly resonated for the audiences and today, and then at the time that movie came out 15 or 20 years ago. But is it going to resonate in 50 years, right? A movie about war as a drug will be significant 50 years from now, 100 years from now, 200 years from now as a piece of art, because it's talking about something that isn't specific only to a specific time and place. It doesn't have a narrow message. It has a broader message that can speak to all people. Okay, so don't feel like your movie gets better the more themes you explore. I would, sorry, just checking my notes again. What do I mean by structure? Remember, I put structure ahead of character, even of how the story is structured. So what do I want to explore in The Godfather are the sins of the father invested. The structure helps dictate how to create my character. At the beginning of the movie, I'm choosing to have a character who feels that they are not limited in any way by their family. The sins of the father don't impact them at all. And gradually over the course of the movie, they're drawn in more and more and more structurally until, as we're approaching the end, they literally take over for their father and step into his position, in essence, becoming the father. And that's followed through the structure. So the structure will lay out where your character is at various points. Same for in The Hurt Locker. We start with the guy. If you were to ask, you know, his tour in Iraq is about to end, the soldier, if you were to ask him, do you want to leave Iraq? He would say, of course. There's nothing I would rather do. But then structurally, we see the adrenaline and the camaraderie that's involved in his day-to-day life in Iraq. Then structurally, we bring him home. And then we show the difficulties that he has at home until he's finally ultimately given this choice. Do you want to stay home, or does your addiction drive you, even though intellectually you know it's a mistake, does it drive you to want to go back? So that's how structure is playing into determining who your character is, right? Because, by the way, what makes a TV series, a long-term TV series, different than a movie? In a movie, your character changes, right? Your lead character changes. What happens over the course of the movie impacts their point of view, either about the world or about themselves, right? They change as a result of the journey. Whereas in long-term series on TV, your characters don't change purposefully. They don't change, or they change extremely gradually. So from week to week to week, they're the same character encountering situations. And each time it's in effect a new lesson impacting this character's journey that basically never ends. Now we're seeing, by the way, in recent years, this great development for writers is more and more TV series are resembling movies. In effect, miniseries of 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 episodes where you are able to arc characters and have that kind of more film-like experience with a TV series. So there's being more and more crossover, but that's the thing about in a movie, your character maybe they don't change at the end, and that's the tragedy, right? But they're given the opportunity to change, or they see that they've had the opportunity and lost it. So tragically, they let it pass by. But that's what makes a movie different than television. So again, I've been talking a great deal about theme and about premise, but I'm saying those are the things that are dictating who your character are. One other basic point of view that I have, by the way, I think simplicity is often termed as a pejorative. But I think for most movies, unless it's like a murder mystery or something that's very plot heavy with a lot of plot complications, simplicity is a great virtue. If you're talking about something of depth that's really worth exploring, then the simple setup to get into that conversation, a simple way to force a character to face this greatest challenge, the thing they're most torn about in the world, a simple way to get to that discussion is fantastic. Simplicity can often usually be a great virtue in movies. And in the same way, I think of a character's journey in a simple way, which is this following. There's two things happening in your movie. One is the plot, right? That's the things that happen. This happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, right? Then there's also the emotional through line that's carrying you through the movie. It's how your character is changing as a result of their journey, right? One is overt, the plot. We're seeing things, this happened, and this happened, and this happened. One is not overt, right? It's what's changing internally in your lead character, how they're changing and adjusting. One is overt, known. The other is often unknown, subconscious by the lead character. Perhaps only once in the movie, late, do they realize this journey that they've been on. The audience has been aware of it, but they're not aware of it, right? And the division that I make is head versus heart. The head intellectual is the things that are happening in your movie. The heart is what's happening to your lead character or characters internally, how they're adjusting based on what's happening. They're going from a journey. So in the case of Michael in The Godfather, it's his tragic journey, where he's going from someone who feels control of his life and the ability to walk away and start a new life. And by the end, he's completely been taken over by the life. Remember, if any of you are Godfather fans, I'm not quite sure what movies are popular, what American movies are popular in Russia and what aren't, but on the third Godfather, he has a line, Michael, where he says, "Just as I thought I was getting out, they dragged me back in," right? So it's just all three movies are about this journey of this person. So he's changing over the course of the movie in terms of his worldview and how he sees himself and his place in the world. Same for the Hurt Locker that we discussed, right? Gradually over the course of this movie, he's beginning to realize that he craves this drug war, and he tries to resist it, but he can't resist it and gives into it. And so that's a tragic journey. So these, in Die Hard, it's really a movie about class. It's about these capitalistic mercenaries who are taking over this gigantic global business, and John McClane represents just the common man, a regular guy. And can he take on the system, including the police, including the FBI, right? Can one man take on all these forces and overcome them by virtue of a good heart, let's say, or caring about other people, whatever, caring about the common man. At the very beginning of that movie, a limo is sent to pick him up by this company, and the limo driver says, I got to admit, I've never driven a limo before, a limousine. And John McClane says, and I've never ridden in one. Again, very conscious, we're going to make a common man. So his journey is a joyful journey of empowerment. And by the end, he and we recognize that one man can make a difference, that one man, the common man, can take on these forces. That's the point of view of the filmmakers. Whether it's true or not, that's their point of view. That's what they wanted to say in their movie. So we have this plot happening, and then we have the head, that's the plot, and we have the heart, which is internal to the character, and that internal journey. One is overt, one is usually subtextual, right? But because we chose a theme inherent to the premise, the plot naturally explores this theme. And because we chose a character who is torn by this theme and forced to go on this challenge or this journey, then they are internally challenged by it too. And they're forced to confront the most significant issues internal to them, right? So as a result of that, the head and the heart are happening as we carry through the movie. And another pointer, they're happening structurally the same pace, right? At the beginning of the movie, when we create the world, we're also creating sort of the situation that our lead character is in, the challenge or difficulties. And at the same time, we're setting up who they are as a person, right? So as we talked about it in The Godfather, he's a person who's left his family. He's now a soldier. He has nothing to do with his family. That's how he feels about himself. When the inciting incident happens, the big change that's introduced, that change affects the plot, right? Often forcing our hero to go on a journey. In the case of the Godfather, that's when his father is shot. That's the inciting incident. But it also challenges your lead character internally and sets them off on this internal journey. And as they progress through the plot, they're being changed externally, right? Michael is getting more and more power in the family, but they're also changing internally. Often, again, they're unaware of it. More and more and more, he's losing the person he was at the beginning and becoming more and more like his father, right? So the structure is matching itself. And another great example is Finding Nemo that we talked about. So plot-wise, he is getting closer and closer to saving, saving his son, finding his son who's lost and saving him. But at the same rate, he is changing inside. He's coming to see life not as just a series of dangers, but also as an adventure, to lead a more fulfilling life, to embrace, right? And what we're leading up to often structurally is towards the end, this moment of choice, right? The strongest way that we can say something in our movie is usually by giving our lead character the most difficult choice we can, right? Do you choose to see life as an adventure, or do you choose safety? Right? It has to be a hard choice, and it has to be a choice that has a great deal of risk, okay? For it to mean anything. It can't be an easy choice, or can't be imposed on you, because then it's no choice at all. Do you accept the mantle of, if you're Michael in The Godfather, do you accept the mantle to take over for your father, to step into his shoes? In Finding Nemo, all is lost. Do you continue to risk yourself in order to save your son, right? In Die Hard, do you give up as all the forces of the world are arrayed against a common man? Do you give up, or do you decide to continue to fight despite all these things being arrayed against you, even though you're most likely to lose and to be killed, right? How does a common man react in this situation? So we've got our plot designed to pose this question. We've chosen a character who's going to be most internally challenged by this question. And so that's what triggers the end of your movie, right? It's that choice. If it's a tragedy, they make the wrong choice, or they make the right choice too late. That's often the case, right? You only see the impact of your actions too late, right? That's a tragedy, right? Or if it's a comedy, we have our character and they end up making the right choice, and your audience is enthralled because they've grown to identify with this character, and now we're rewarding this character for going on this journey and making the realizations that we feel were important. And parenthetically, we in the audience are making the realizations at the same time. So again, checking my notes. The other quick point on that is movies are a great way to convey emotion, right? They're less effective in conveying information. There are other ways to convey information, but if you can move your audience, then you've really done something, right? And so when we can make an intellectual point in our movie, but we want to combine it with this emotional aspect of a character, the coming to this realization, feeling this sense of empowerment or this sense of loss or whatever. And emotion always is more significant than your plot for your audience. Emotion is what gets us in that seat. It makes us feel, and it makes a great movie. You know, it takes an average movie and it makes it a great movie if you can move us. So back to character. We're looking to find a character that will be the best way to say and to what we want to say, to explore the issues that we want to explore. And so we're choosing characters who are torn by this issue inside. Again, they might be unaware of it. At the beginning of the movie, they might think, oh, I'm not torn at all. I know exactly how to live life, right? I'm very certain of it. And the joy of our premise is that it's forcing us out of this comfort zone. This inciting incident is forcing us on a journey to face this. Okay, but does this apply, by the way, to biographies? What if I'm making a movie, say, about Gandhi or about Muhammad Ali? Well, then you would say, well, no, of course, we're starting with a character, but not really. What we're starting with, the character becomes the quote unquote big idea, the premise of the movie. But then the next thing to decide, if we're making a biography, is what is the theme of this life, right? So Muhammad Ali was this great American boxer who he lived 80, 90 years, I think, something like that, and went through a lot of experiences. Well, the filmmaker has to zero in on one portion of that life. They can't tell it all. So what portion do they zero in? And the best way to get there is, what's the theme? What's the meaning of this whole life? What do I want to say about this life? And in the case of this filmmaker named Michael Mann, he focused on Muhammad Ali, just like in Die Hard, a single man taking on the system. Because during the Vietnam War, Muhammad Ali was a conscientious objector and wouldn't join the military. So the filmmaker zeroes in on those years and that conflict to tell his story. And then he zeroes in on those aspects of Muhammad Ali's personality, character, life, focuses on those, and puts aside these other areas of his life that don't touch upon that issue. So even in a biography, I think great filmmakers are often using this approach of what aspect of this individual do we focus on to tell our tale? Does our hero have to be likable? This is a big issue. In the United States, executives go, yes, they have to be likable. We have to like the guy. Unfortunately, they often make the decisions on what movies get made. But writers, likable doesn't matter at all. We want them flawed. We want them flawed in a way your audience identifies with, right? So that's why when we choose our theme and we talk about this universal theme and we pick a character who's torn by it, we know our audience can identify with that character because they're concerned about the same thing that your audience is concerned about. So what we want to do is we want to empathize with characters and identify with them, but they don't need to be likable. And great films are about change of a character, and therefore those characters have to be flawed in some way. At the beginning, they don't see the world the way they end up seeing it, or even in a tragedy, who go on this journey, unless, of course, you start with a character who's self-actualized, and then by the end of the film, the inciting incident forces them out of their comfort zone and makes them see the world in this askew way. And then finally, by the end, they either get there or they don't. In any case, there's going to be a journey. When we talk about side characters and we're choosing them, they too, we want to define them based on this overarching theme. So we're selecting characters. They don't get a separate theme. We don't talk about class with our lead character and then talk about self-worth with a secondary character, because we have a finite amount of time and to speak to our audience. So a better choice would be if their points of view, our various characters, are all dealing with the same central theme or issue that we're exploring, but they look at it from different points of view or attitudes, right? So they're coming at it from a different place. And some people are going to be right about it, and some people are going to be wrong about it, right? And some people are mentor figures and they already know the right way to see the issue. And some people are just tragic, roadkill, and they're going to be wiped out because they make the wrong choices about the issue. But if we can explore characters, right? So in The Godfather, the son, Sonny, the oldest son, he can't wait to be like his dad. He wants to take over for his dad. But as it turns out, it's discovered he doesn't have the right temperament. The son, Fredo, who is sort of weak-willed and ends up betraying the family, his most famous line is like, "I got passed over. I should have taken over for dad, not you, Michael." So too, he embraced the notion of taking over for the family. One of the mafia leaders who betrays the family late says, "It was nothing personal. I just felt I wanted to start my own family." Right? So all these side characters are looking subconsciously, usually, but exploring the same basic theme, the same basic question, but from different angles and points of view. Another great example is a Pixar movie called The Incredibles. It's about this family of superheroes, right? But life has been hard on them. They're basically retired. And ultimately, they're forced by circumstances to sort of get active again as superheroes and work together to overcome this great obstacle. How are those characters defined? Well, the filmmakers decided this movie is about family. That's the theme that we're exploring, and that the strength of a family working together is stronger than the greatest of superpowers. That's basically their message. Whether it's true or not, that's up to you. But they had this consistent vision and this notion of what they wanted to say in this movie. So what powers do they give family members? Well, for the father of the family, what is a father in a family? Traditionally, he's the source of strength. That's the cliche view of fathers. So what is the power? Super strength. Mothers have to deal with so much. They have so much on their plate and difficulty handling. They're kind of really the people who take care of everyone and everything. So what's the mother's superpower? She can stretch, to any length. The daughter, teenage daughter, well, what are teenage girls going through? Well, a lot of times they want to be invisible. They are very wary about the world until they're finding their true selves. And so she's given the power of invisibility. The son, I think, who's about 11, he's just pure energy. And so the power he gets is he can be fast. And then the infant of the family is this wild card, this great unknown. So this infant has all sorts of wacky powers that just come up out of the blue. By virtue of defining each character based on the theme of family, and they have different points of view as a result of their position, note at any second, every moment of that movie is exploring the theme, but not overtly, right? Which is boring exposition, words, and instead it's inherent to the action. At every moment of that movie, as the plot is progressing, they are also talking about theme because it's involving the family members and how they interact together and work together or not work together. So, all right. Antagonists, a quick note there. We want the stronger your antagonist, the better your hero will be, right? The weaker your antagonist, you're taking pressure off your hero, you're lessening your hero. Even in a comedy, don't make your antagonist a joke, right? Because as good as your antagonist is, it forces your hero to rise higher. Or in a tragedy, try to rise higher and fall short. That's number one. Number two, respect your antagonist, right? They too are torn by this basic theme that you have in your movie. They don't see it the way your hero sees it, and probably they don't see it the way you see it. But give them the very best argument you could possibly give. Like in a political debate, you have a point of view, a political point of view. You're having your hero embody that point of view, but they're very torn about it. The more difficult it is, the more stronger your argument will be. Likewise, for your antagonist, give them the best argument possible for their side. Give them a reason for why they see the world they see. That way you have this great clash. You're saying something of more worth, and you're also elevating your hero. Do you have to have an antagonist in your movie? The answer is no. In most movies, the best antagonist, the chief antagonist, is your hero. It's internal to your hero, right? If your hero is torn about something deep down, then they serve as both a protagonist, promoting, well, this one view, I want to promote this, but I'm very torn about it, right? So in Finding Nemo, I want my kid to be happy and live life fully, but it's awfully dangerous and scary out there, right? So these factors are in competition internally to the lead character constantly. So the biggest antagonist in that movie is the protagonist, the father, internal to him, in this constant debate that he's facing. And the ultimate decision that he's facing is this internal struggle. Character arcs, that's what makes a character count, is if they change over the course of the movie, or if at least they have the opportunity to change, right? That's what draws us in, because we want them to see the light. We want them to improve. And we rejoice when they do. And we're heartbroken when they don't. And even if they die at the end, note, if they kind of realize what the right way to see the world is, I'm going to move to questions in just a little bit. But I've lost my place, but if we see this struggle that they go through, then they might die plot-wise, but the audience will feel this sense of triumph. I just want to get in three quick things before we move to the questions. One is, you want your characters active, right? If you want to draw in an audience, we're not interested in watching bystanders, okay? Like in novels, sometimes the lead character is watching from afar, right? They're commenting on what's going on, but they're not the people involved in the central event. We don't want that in a movie. We want characters who are forced into action by the plot. So that's one way to draw in an audience. We want them, give them a goal, whether they're aware of it or not, have them pursuing something, right? They're pursuing something. They think they want a thing. What they end up getting is also enlightenment inside. Have them pursue goals. We like punching up and not down. We don't like seeing movies about powerful people oppressing little people. We like to see little people taking on powerful people and overcoming those obstacles. So punch up, don't punch down if you want to have an audience identify with your lead character. And there's a great tradition of movies where we support anti-heroes, bad guys, criminals. Why do we support them? One, because they're active. Two, they have a goal to get better or get away. So even villains who are leads of movies, they're the protagonists of a certain movie, we will still get behind them as long as they're active in pursuing the goal. All right, with that, thank you, by the way, for your patience listening to this endless monologue. And so let's go to questions. Well, I would say that we, as an audience, relate to other humans, right? So one is you make them a real person. Number two, you make them torn about this very significant issue that your movie is exploring, right? Have them torn by it deep down. Then, because we care about the issue, we'll care about the journey of the characters. Your premise is, your plot is all designed to challenge this internal struggle that they're facing more and more and more. It's building, right, over the course. So that's a way to make us identify with your character. Like I said, make them active, don't make them passive. Now, of course, by that, I don't mean they have to be active from page one, right? Frequently, the inciting incident is external to the lead character. They're just in a world and an earthquake happens or a tsunami hits or circumstances happen that force them to action. But if you have a lead character who isn't actively pursuing some kind of goal, at least a third of the way in, at the very latest, the halfway mark, you're making a mistake. So instead, design your plot around a character who's actively pursuing a goal, some sort of resolution. I think, by the way, we sometimes think that our character becomes more alive if we give them lots and lots of things to be torn about, and they're completely lost in various realms of their lives. My problem is that sort of dilutes the impact of this main thing that you want them torn about. If your theme that you're exploring is really significant, really worth exploring and talking about and thinking about, then having your lead character torn about that one thing and having your supporter characters also torn about that one thing is enough. That will give your characters 3 dimensions, right? Because they're torn about this difficult issue that we're all torn about. Next question. I think it's more a marketing issue in terms of what's a high concept. The high concept is usually just something that you can describe in a sentence or two. We used to call it an elevator pitch. So imagine getting on the lobby elevator of this tall building with an executive or a producer. And can you describe your movie in the time it takes to get to the 30th floor, right? That's a high concept. It's a big idea. It's sort of easy to get. And it's like, oh, that seems compelling or interesting. Low concepts are more soft, where you're just talking about, say, real life or a smaller incident or how various group of friends, say, interact with each other. It's a very low concept. Both movies are extremely valid, right? The high concept just makes it easier to sell. How do you turn a low concept movie into a high concept movie? It's difficult because it's really just the idea of the premise. Because if you have to have a high concept idea for the premise, my advice is, as a writer trying to make money, that's what I start with. I may have a high concept idea, a good one, once or twice a year, all right? They don't come very often. And when they come, you've got to be ready to record it on your phone right away. And you need to be ready to, write it down and remember it. You've got to be keeping a file of these ideas that you can go to when it comes time for you to find an idea. So one is latch on them when they come. And two, so don't think that they just pop up out of the blue. Test out your ideas on your friends and see, do they get excited right away? That's a high concept idea. So it's okay to talk about it with a bunch of other people and see, what they think, and are they excited by your idea too? So it's hard for me to conceive of how do you turn a low concept idea into a high concept idea. It is possible to start with theme. I've done it on a couple of my scripts. I wanted to do a movie about race, which is of course a huge issue in the United States. And so I started with what I wanted to say, and then I came up with a story off that, again, which was trying to come up with this challenging situation I can put a lead character in, that they have to face this underlying thematic issue. But it's harder to do. And if you start with theme, you're more likely to end up with a softer story. I can't stress enough, both of them are valid. Of course, high concept ideas tend to be more commercial, but low concept ideas, when they're made, tend to be maybe more artistically satisfying. And what's great about the world we're living in now with streaming and more open distribution systems is that it's possible to make smaller movies and find an audience. So like I said at the beginning, it is a great time to be a writer, I think, because you are able to tell these more personal, smaller stories and yet still find an audience, not a mass audience, but find an audience to make it feasible that, hey, this movie works and it's speaking to people. Okay, next question. All right, again, if you've chosen a theme that's worth exploring, a difficult theme, and it can, something like is like, should we put ourselves out there even though we might get hurt, or should we withdraw and be safe but comfortable? Now, we intellectually know what the answer is. Oh, yes, of course, you should live your adventure. But in our own lives, mostly we do the second thing. We don't put ourselves out there, both in our career or in relationships, right? We're very wary and fearful often. So that's a good question to talk about. So if we have two characters who are torn about it, and one is taking one side and the other is taking another side, right? So in Die Hard, it's one of the great villains. Well, he's a mercenary. He's taken a whole other point of view about the obligation to society completely. Our common man is a police officer who thinks that he's doing good in this difficult world. He's just trying to get justice in the world. This other guy just doesn't give it. He's given up on justice. He thinks justice is a lie, and that what we need to do in our lives is look out for ourselves, because that's the reality of it. And so they're both very strong personalities who are struggling, well, obviously the villain isn't struggling too much. He's made his mind up, but our hero is sort of forced to struggle with what can the common man do. That's it. I don't think writing up a character study is off. I don't think that's a good idea usually. The reason being, how people will write up a biography of their lead character and it'll be 3 to 5 pages, single spaced, all these details. Well, almost none of that is going to get in your script, right? So you're going to give a certain complexities to this character that will be in this, biography that you wrote for yourself. But because it doesn't translate onto the screen into your screenplay, it's just going to come across as confusing. So instead, our job, when we talk about a three-dimensional character, if we're finding a character who's torn, a real person, by the way, make them real, but they're facing this difficult issue internally that many of us are also facing. That's your entree to your audience. And otherwise, you're giving them circumstances and details that empower your premise, right? That, why is John McClane in Die Hard going to that building that night? What's his, what's driving him to take action at first? It's his, so his marriage is in trouble. And he's there for his wife. Those sort of plot details or character details are important to help get us into the plot, streamline the setup. Remember earlier I talked about simplicity as a virtue. So we're using these character traits to explain quickly and efficiently why this guy is in this circumstance, because the setup isn't what's joyful in that movie, right? And instead, what's joyful is once the thing gets started, we want to explain as quickly as we can why that guy's there and why he wants to fight against these mercenaries. Everything else is extraneous. Okay, next question. Often it's as follows. I have an idea for a plot. Is this a good idea? That's question number one. Question number two, what does this plot explore that I want to talk about? I'm not going to impose what I want to talk about on it, right? I'm not going to force the thing that I care about onto this premise. And instead, I'm saying, hey, premise, what issues do you talk about naturally that I think are worth talking about, right? And I'm going to make it, is it a hard question, a difficult question that the audience struggles with, right? Basic things. What gives one self-worth? What is my duty to my fellow man, right? These are very difficult things that we all struggle with. So, what is the hard question? Now, next question, what is a character that who's a person who this question would be really hard for to have to face? That my plot is forcing them to face. That's the next question. Again, don't try to talk about something nobody has ever talked about before. And instead, talk about something that that you and your friends are obsessing over, that you care about. In your country, what is the big issue that's sort of an undercurrent of what's happening, in America, race is huge. Every news story is about race. We're all thinking about it all the time and about our history in America and how are individuals treated and groups are treated and what is our duty as a society. That stuff is so interesting to your audience because it's what's on their minds, right? So if you can zero in on that, if something like that flows naturally from your premise, your plot, then you're good to go, right? Then it's just a series of okay, great. I know what I'm talking about. And you, by the way, you're the author. You decide what you want to say about that issue. You don't have to say what everyone else says. You can say something completely different, right? And then you're making your choices based on that decision. Who's this character? Who's their opposition? How do they feel at the beginning versus how do they feel at the end? These are all sort of answered by your big idea, your plot, and by your theme. I see that we're out of time. I mean, I have nowhere to go for the rest of my life, but I'm told that it's very late right now where you guys are at. So unless there's anything else, I'm going to say thank you so much for having me. It was a great honor and privilege to talk to you. It was not written for Jim Carrey. Casting is one of the last things that happens in most movies. I wrote that movie with a partner, and in our mind, the lead would be someone like what's his name? Well, his name is escaping me right now, but another actor. But we knew we couldn't probably get that actor either. But it just helped us be consistent in writing it. We had an image in our minds of what the character could be. At that time, Jim Carrey was playing very broad characters. And our movie was really about a regular person, a real guy, who then, because of this curse, he ends up acting in a wild way, right? So I have a couple of quick stories, if I can tell them. One is, originally, the first person cast in it was Hugh Grant, who was in 4 Weddings and a Funeral, and he was going to play the lawyer. And he stayed in LA instead of returning to London for a meeting on Monday. But that Friday night, he got caught in a car with a prostitute on Sunset Boulevard. So suddenly, he was a bad idea to play this lawyer, right? So he dropped out of the movie, so we lost our lead. So then Jim Carrey at that time was trying to move from being a completely wild comic character to more realistic. And he thought that this project might be a good middle step. But he liked the movie, but he had signed on to do another movie. And he signed on to do that movie for $6 million. And in the meantime, he had some hits. And now he was making $20 million a movie, which is a great deal of money, the most ever. And so he was trying to force the people who were making the first movie to pay him $20 million to do that movie. And when they missed a deadline, he still had to do the movie, but he could choose when to do it in the future. And he said, if you want me to do that movie next, you have to give me $20 million. And they said no. And so he did Liar Liar as sort of a threat to try to get more money out of the other movie. And they called his bluff. And so he ended up doing Liar Liar. Thank God, because I made a lot of money from it. So good question. Thank you. It's the same thing. If the characters are defined, they have different points of view or different attitudes about the central question. That's what you would do in an ensemble piece. Does that make sense? So they're all looking at the same important issue, but from different perspectives. I would say Ocean's 11 is really about, the fun of the plot is all about, this very intricate heist. That's all the plot, but the theme of it is about loyalty and who can you trust. And so the villains are all people who betrayed trust, right? And the team, the unity of the team is all built on trust, and they all have to trust each other to do their jobs. And when trust is weakened, that's when the team begins to fall apart. So you can see, even on an ensemble piece like Ocean's 11, theme becomes this dominant way of defining and choosing which characters to tell the tale. Okay. Guys, again, thank you so much.
Спасибо большое, Стив. Это был очень полезный мастер-класс. Было очень интересно. И, конечно, хотим поблагодарить нашего переводчика Сэма. Спасибо, что помог нам сегодня. Хочу также поблагодарить всех участников мастер-класса. И, как мы обещали, для тех участников, которые досмотрели мастер-класс до конца, у нас есть подарок. Вам будет доступна скидка в размере 10% на первый семестр по всем программам весеннего набора этого года. Для того, чтобы ей воспользоваться, вам, соответственно, просто нужно оставить заявку на нашем сайте. Еще раз спасибо. Обязательно присоединяйтесь ко всем нашим другим мероприятиям, к мастер-классам по пятницам и к другим открытым мероприятиям в нашей школе. Заходите на наш сайт, и будем рады видеть вас в индустрии. Спасибо.